What if the most romantic words could hide behind a simple question? When the most powerful millionaire in the city whispered, "May I continue?" he was no longer talking about the pages of a book, but about the love story he had just begun with an innocent young woman. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. If you want to discover how 8 months changed 2 lives forever, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because this story will make your heart skip a beat. The scent of magnolias wafted through the ancient library like an invisible yet undeniable presence, similar to the feelings that would soon blossom between its century-old walls. It was a warm April afternoon when Emily Parker's trembling hands accidentally brushed against those of a stranger, causing hundreds of manuscript pages to scatter like white butterflies across the marble floor of the New York Public Library. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, immediately kneeling to gather the papers, not daring to look at the man who was now bending down beside her. Time seemed to stand still as they both collected that mess of old pages. Emily, having just turned 21, her brown hair pulled back in an improvised bun, didn't notice the intensity with which those hazel eyes observed her. "It doesn't matter," he replied, with a deep voice that resonated in the sacred silence of the library. "Sometimes the best chapters of our lives begin with an unexpected stumble." Emily looked up, finding herself face to face with the most attractive man she had ever seen. He was about 38, dressed with understated elegance, and his smile conveyed a confidence that contrasted with her shyness. "I'm James," he introduced himself as he handed her the last manuscript, their fingers brushing again in a contact that sent an electric current down Emily's spine. "Emily," she answered, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "I'm the librarian in the classical literature section. In this world, there are people who cross our path by chance and others who come to stay by destiny. The difficult part is recognizing the difference before it's too late." When James said goodbye that afternoon, Emily could never have imagined that the man she had just met, the same one who had humbly picked up papers from the floor with her, was James Sullivan, owner of half the historic buildings in New York City. Nor did she know that he would return the next day, and the day after that, initiating a dance of seemingly casual encounters that would forever transform 2 lives marked by different kinds of solitude. From the top of the ancient oak bookshelf, the portraits of Hemingway and Fitzgerald seemed to observe with interest the beginning of that love story that would defy prejudices and scars from the past. As silent witnesses, they knew what Emily was unaware of, that destiny has a peculiar way of intertwining souls meant to meet, even when everything seems to keep them apart. 3 weeks had passed since that first encounter. The routine at the New York Public Library had acquired a new rhythm, marked by James's daily visits, each afternoon as punctual as the chimes of St. Patrick's Cathedral. He appeared with 2 cups of coffee and some question about classical literature that only Emily could answer. "I don't understand these references to Fitzgerald," he commented one afternoon, pointing to a paragraph in an old edition. The aroma of New York coffee mingled with the smell of old paper, creating an intimate atmosphere between the centuries-old bookshelves. Emily smiled, moving closer to explain the passage. "It's a metaphor about time and its effect on feelings. See how he uses the contrast between the ephemeral and the eternal." Her words flowed with passion as she explained the secrets of those lines. What Emily didn't know was that James Sullivan had studied American literature at Harvard before dedicating himself to the family business. His questions were merely pretexts to hear her speak, to observe how her brown eyes shined as she explained the complexities of American classics. That afternoon, as the library closed, Rachel, Emily's colleague, was waiting for her at the entrance with a mischievous smile. "Do you know who that man is who comes to see you every day?" she asked with a conspiratorial tone. Emily shook her head, adjusting her scarf around her neck to protect herself from the cool New York evening air. "That's James Sullivan, of the Sullivans from the Upper East Side. He owns half of Manhattan, including that building where you rent your apartment in Brooklyn," Rachel revealed with wide-open eyes. Emily's world wobbled like a house of cards in the wind. Suddenly the conversations, the coffees, the shy smiles acquired a new meaning. Why would a man like him pretend to need help understanding Fitzgerald? What was he really seeking from her? That night, as she observed the lights of New York City from the small window of her Brooklyn apartment, Emily felt a contradictory mix of emotions. The determination that had always shone in her eyes like Vermont maple was now confronted with the insecurity she had carried since childhood. An orphaned librarian and a real estate magnate, two worlds separated by an abyss of social and economic differences. "Tomorrow I'll ask him directly why he didn't tell me who he was," she murmured to herself, as her fingers absently caressed the pages of a book by Whitman. However, deep in her heart, a voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, he had hidden his identity precisely because he wanted to be known for who he was, not for what he possessed. The sound of jazz drifted through the window, mingling with her confused thoughts. Like the contradictions in Fitzgerald's verses they had analyzed that afternoon, Emily felt that her life was beginning to intertwine in paradoxes impossible to resolve. The next morning dawned wrapped in an unusual fog for New York City, as if the city itself wanted to reflect the confusion residing in Emily's heart. With determined steps but a trembling soul, she headed to the library, prepared to confront James with the newly discovered truth. However, he didn't appear that afternoon, or the next. 3 days passed without a trace of the man who had made the afternoons at the library something special. Emily oscillated between relief and a disappointment she refused to acknowledge. Perhaps Rachel had been mistaken, or perhaps upon learning he'd been discovered, James had decided to disappear. On the 4th day, while organizing manuscripts in the most remote section of the library, a familiar voice broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Emily turned to find James holding a small bouquet of magnolias. He was dressed more casually than usual, as if he had wanted to shed the image of the powerful businessman. "Why didn't you tell me who you really were?" she asked directly, maintaining the physical and emotional distance she had mentally rehearsed during his absence. James gently placed the flowers on the oak table and sighed before answering. "Because when I inherited the Sullivan name, I also inherited hundreds of people who only see my properties, my bank accounts, and my connections. For once, I wanted someone to see me, just me." The sincerity in his voice disarmed the defenses that Emily had built. For the first time since she'd known him, she perceived a genuine vulnerability in his hazel eyes. "And there's something else I must confess," he continued, taking a step forward. "I never needed help understanding Fitzgerald or any other author. I studied American literature before the family business absorbed me." Emily held her breath, feeling a mixture of indignation and something deeper that she dared not name. "You've been deceiving me all this time?" "I prefer to think I was finding pretexts to be near you," he replied, with a shy smile that contradicted his usual confidence. "The New York coffee was real, at least." Silence settled between them, populated by unasked questions and contained emotions. In the distance, the sound of the library clock marked seconds that seemed to stretch indefinitely. "I don't know if I can trust someone who begins a relationship with lies," Emily finally said, though her voice betrayed the internal battle between reason and heart. "I'm not asking for immediate trust," James replied. "I'm only asking for time. Time to prove to you that there's more truth in these meetings than in all the formal introductions I've had in my life." Emily observed the bouquet of magnolias on the table, their fragrance subtly invading the space between them. A symbol of dignity and perseverance in Southern traditions, they now seemed a silent promise of future sincerity. "One coffee," she finally conceded, "outside the library, without literary pretexts. An honest conversation." The smile that illuminated James's face was like the New York sun dispersing the morning fog, bright and warm, revealing a man different from the powerful businessman everyone knew. What neither of them knew then was that this coffee would mark the beginning of the first great challenge for both, learning to navigate between two seemingly incompatible worlds, while the shadows of the past lurked, waiting for the opportune moment to emerge. The Gramercy Park Cafe bustled with life that Friday afternoon. Located in the heart of historic Manhattan, it represented neutral ground for Emily and James, away from both the library and the luxurious spaces he frequented. "Why a librarian?" James asked after taking a sip of his coffee, looking at her with genuine interest. Emily looked away toward the antique stained glass windows adorning the space, visible from their table. "The books never abandoned me," she finally responded, surprising herself with the raw honesty of her words. When you grow up in an orphanage in Chicago, you learn to seek company in unexpected places. The characters of Hemingway, Faulkner, and Steinbeck were my most constant friends. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable but respectful. as if James understood the weight of that confession. "And your parents?" he asked softly, just brushing the limits of what Emily allowed others to know about her history. "My mother left me at the doorstep of St. Elizabeth's orphanage when I was 3 years old. About my father, not even a name," she explained, with a calmness that had taken years to build. "I don't search for them or judge them. I understood long ago that some questions don't have satisfactory answers." James nodded, without offering the pity that Emily so detested receiving when she told her story. Instead, he took a sip of coffee and shared his own truth. "I grew up in the Sullivan mansion, surrounded by luxury, ancestral traditions, and crushing expectations. My parents were so busy maintaining the family legacy that they forgot to raise a son. The Sullivan name was my prison before it became my responsibility." Emily observed James's hands, strong but with the delicacy of someone who had spent hours among pages of books, contradictory hands, like him. "It seems we both grew up alone, just in opposite circumstances," she reflected. "Maybe that's why books also became my refuge," James confessed. "Although, unlike you, I had to hide my passion for literature." The Sullivans needed a strong heir, a businessman, not a dreamer among dusty pages. The conversation flowed like a quiet but deep river, revealing unexpected coincidences and differences that, instead of separating them, created a fascinating balance. The coffee grew cold, forgotten amid confessions and occasional laughter. It was then that Emily noticed a man at the neighboring table, who, pretending to read a newspaper, seemed overly attentive to their conversation. When their gazes briefly crossed, a chill ran down her back. "Is something wrong?" James asked, noticing her change in attitude. "That man is watching us," Emily murmured, leaning slightly forward. James discreetly turned his head, and his expression immediately hardened. Without saying a word, he stood up and approached the stranger's table, who quickly put away his phone and left the premises. "Who was that?" Emily asked when James returned to the table, concern evident on his face. "A photographer who works for my family," he replied with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "It seems our honest conversation will have a higher price than I imagined." Emily felt that the warm and close world they had built in the last few hours was crumbling under the weight of external reality. "Your family is investigating me?" The question emerged as a wounded whisper. James took her hands between his, in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but that Emily received with ambivalence. "My family considers anyone who approaches a Sullivan to represent a potential risk or benefit. They're incapable of conceiving disinterested relationships," he explained, bitterness tinging each word. "But I won't let them interfere. Not this time." However, as they left the cafe under the golden light of the New York sunset, Emily felt that a shadow hovered over that nascent connection. The price of truth could be too high, and the difference between their worlds more insurmountable than they had imagined during those hours of confessions. What neither suspected was that, at that precise moment, destiny was preparing the first major test for their budding relationship, a test that would arrive in the form of a sealed envelope on Emily's desk the following morning. The brown envelope rested on Emily's desk like a threatening intruder. The word termination stood out in red over the official letterhead of the New York Public Library. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, although she already intuited the contents. "Budget cuts. Departmental restructuring. We appreciate your services." The bureaucratic phrases attempted to disguise a devastating reality. She was fired. 2 weeks' notice and minimal severance pay were the entire consideration for her 5 years dedicated to those books she considered almost family. Emily carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. She wouldn't cry, at least not there. The pride she had cultivated since childhood, as a protective shield, activated automatically, straightening her back and drying tears that hadn't even had time to form. As she left the library that afternoon, with steps that intended to project a dignity she didn't feel, she found James waiting for her in the square, leaning against his car with a concerned expression. "How did you find out?" she asked without stopping, continuing her path toward the bus stop. James walked beside her, respecting her space but not leaving her alone. "I have contacts at City Hall. The cuts are affecting all cultural institutions, not just your library." Emily stopped abruptly, confronting him with a look where vulnerability and determination waged a silent battle. "And you've come to offer me money? A charity job? What's next, James? The poor librarian rescued by the benevolent magnate? The words came out harsher than she intended, laden with the weight of all the insecurities she had kept at bay during their encounters. I came to offer companionship, he replied, with a calmness that momentarily disarmed her defense. And perhaps some ice cream in Central Park? They say that chocolate and cherry ice cream cures any bad news. The simplicity of the gesture provoked a treacherous smile on Emily's lips. However, the shadow of economic uncertainty still lingered there, latent. I don't need you to save me, James, she finally said, resuming her walk toward the park. I know, he replied, walking beside her. It's one of the reasons you fascinate me. During the next 2 hours, sitting in front of the imposing landscape of Central Park, they shared ice cream while talking about everything except the dismissal. James told anecdotes of his rebellious adolescence, when he escaped etiquette classes to read poetry in the gardens of the Metropolitan Museum. Emily revealed her secret dream of writing a novel inspired by the untold stories of American women. As night fell, when the lights illuminated the park's lakes reflecting like liquid stars on the water, James finally addressed the topic they had been avoiding. I have a proposal for you, he said with a carefully neutral tone. It's purely professional. Emily looked at him with suspicion. I'm listening. I'm cataloguing the family library at our estate outside of Boston. Books that for generations have accumulated without order or criteria. I need someone with experience in cataloguing antique texts. The proposal floated between them like a fragile bubble, laden with unspoken implications. Emily weighed her options. Refusing the offer would mean seeking work in a hostile market for cultural professionals. Accepting it implied entering deeper into James's world, with all the emotional risks that entailed. Why me? She finally asked. You could hire any archival specialist. Because I trust your judgment, he replied without hesitation. And because books need to be touched by hands that love them, not just catalogue them. At that moment, Emily made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. A decision that would lead her to discover family secrets, historical betrayals, and a truth about herself she never could have imagined. I accept, she said firmly. But with one condition. I'll keep my Brooklyn apartment and it will be a formal contract, with all corresponding employment rights. James extended his hand to seal the deal. You'll start on Monday, if that works for you. What Emily didn't know was that James had discreetly purchased the library building 3 days earlier, thus preventing its complete closure. Nor did she know that the position he offered her had been created specifically for her. And above all, she was unaware that this decision would place her directly on the radar of the Sullivan family, awakening old ghosts that had been sleeping for decades within the walls of the family estate. As they walked back through the cobblestone streets of old Manhattan, the scent of magnolias and the distant sound of jazz seemed to presage that their story was just beginning to be written, with ink of sacrifices and promises not yet pronounced. The Sullivan estate rose majestically among centuries-old oak trees, half an hour outside of Boston. The white building, with reddish tiles and colonial-inspired interior courtyards, looked like something out of an American novel. When James's car crossed the imposing wrought-iron gates, Emily felt she was crossing not just a physical threshold, but also an invisible boundary between her previous life and what was to come. This will be your work area, explained James as he guided her through a hallway of whitewashed arches to a spacious and luminous room. Emily held her breath upon entering. The private Sullivan library exceeded any expectations. Oak bookshelves carved from floor to ceiling, a spiral staircase leading to a second level of books, and large windows looking out onto the interior gardens where a colonial fountain created a relaxing aquatic music. It's impressive, she murmured, approaching reverentially the volumes that populated those shelves. And a complete mess, added James with a smile. Generations of Sullivans adding books without any coherent system. There are first editions mixed with cheap 20th century novels, imperial manuscripts next to accounting manuals. Emily was no longer listening to him. Her fingers had found a particularly old copy, whose worn leather spine revealed it to be a first edition of The Great Gatsby. She opened it delicately, inhaling the particular aroma that only true book lovers recognize. History, knowledge, and time condensed into paper and ink. I'll leave you with your new friends, said James, perceiving the immediate connection between Emily and the books. Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, will bring coffee and something to eat. If you need anything, I'll be in my office at the end of the corridor. Once alone, Emily immersed herself in the task with professional enthusiasm. She began by separating the volumes by centuries, then by general themes, assessing the preservation state of each one. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the passage of hours until a female voice startled her. "The young master never brought anyone to organize these books," commented Mrs. Wilson, an elderly woman with a kind face and perceptive eyes, who was placing a tray with coffee and traditional pastries on the table. "I suppose it was necessary," Emily replied evasively, perceiving the barely disguised curiosity of the woman. Mrs. Wilson observed with approval the organized piles that Emily had already begun to form. "James was always different from the rest of the Sullivans," she commented, as if in passing. "Since childhood he would hide here among these books, while his father insisted he learn to ride horses or hunt. He had his secret hideaway behind that bookshelf in the back." Emily followed the direction of Mrs. Wilson's gaze, intrigued by that intimate portrait of James as a child, so different from the powerful businessman everyone knew. "The coffee will get cold," Mrs. Wilson warned before departing, not without adding, "It's good to see these books in the hands of someone who appreciates them. They've been accumulating loneliness for too long." After the snack, Emily continued her methodical work. As she moved a pile of old books, a yellowed envelope fell to the floor. It looked old, with a broken wax seal and calligraphy faded by time. Curiosity won over professional protocol, and Emily extracted the letter from the envelope. "My dear Jay, the conventions that separate us are crueler than any physical distance. As I write these lines, I hear my father discussing with your family the terms of my arranged marriage. But you must know that my heart has only one owner, even if my hand must be given to another out of family obligation. Our secret meetings in the library have been the only consolation in this life of appearances. Between pages of poetry, I found true love, one that transcends surnames and fortunes. Forever yours in the silence of unspoken words. E." Emily's heart beat rapidly as she carefully folded the letter. This was clearly private correspondence, possibly from decades ago. Could Jay be an ancestor of James? The temptation to look for more letters was strong, but her professional ethics prevailed. She returned the missive to its envelope and placed it in a separate box for personal documentation that would require review by James himself. However, as the day progressed, Emily found more similar letters hidden among the oldest books. Some in contemporary English, others in old-fashioned language, all relating fragments of a forbidden love story that seemed to repeat like an echo through generations. So absorbed was she in her discovery that she didn't notice James observing her from the doorway. "I see you've found the secret treasure of the Sullivans," he commented, startling her. Emily turned, feeling inexplicably guilty. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry into private matters." James approached, taking one of the letters delicately. "Don't apologize. These letters have been hidden between pages for generations. Perhaps it was time someone found them." The look they shared contained something new, a complicity born from recognizing historical patterns that seemed to repeat. Emily felt that something indefinable changed between them as the setting sun bathed the library in golden tones, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air like silent witnesses to a crucial moment. What Emily didn't know, as she carefully arranged the letters in a conservation box, was that some of them had been written by James himself and strategically placed for her to find. Letters that expressed in words borrowed from the past what he didn't dare confess in the present. And so as the sun set over the American oaks, two solitary souls began to intertwine between ancient pages and secrets barely revealed, unaware that the first true test for their relationship patiently waited, like a crouched predator, at the family dinner scheduled for the following week. The main dining room of the Sullivan estate gleamed under the light of antique silver candelabras. The table, an imposing piece of oak capable of accommodating 20 diners, had been prepared with English porcelain reserved for special occasions. Emily observed everything from the entrance, feeling that her simple navy blue dress, though elegant, was insufficient amid such opulence. "Breathe," whispered James beside her, gently resting his hand on the small of her back. "They're normal people behind pompous surnames." Emily nodded, though the knot in her stomach suggested otherwise. During the week she had been working in the estate's library, she had managed to avoid encounters with James's family, creating a comfortable bubble between old books and increasingly personal conversations with him. But that night, the Sullivan matriarch, Mrs. Catherine Sullivan, had insisted on meeting the librarian who occupied so much of her son's time. "James, dear, you've finally arrived." Mrs. Sullivan's voice, elegant and cold as marble, resonated through the dining room as she advanced toward them. Tall and slender, with silver hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and discreet but clearly valuable jewelry, the woman perfectly represented traditional American aristocracy. Her eyes, the same hazel shade as James's but lacking his warmth, evaluated Emily from head to toe in a fraction of a second. "So you're the literature expert who's bringing order to our bibliographic chaos," she commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "James speaks wonders of your work." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan," replied Emily, internally thanking years of dealing with intimidating university professors that had taught her to maintain composure. "Your family collection is extraordinary. The inheritance of generations with better taste than money," intervened an elderly man who was approaching, supported by an ebony cane with a silver handle. "Unlike some current generations that have more money than taste." "Grandfather," greeted James with genuine affection, approaching to embrace the elderly man. "Let me introduce Emily Parker." William Sullivan, the family patriarch at 90 years old, possessed a vitality that belied his age and a mischievous look that contrasted with the severity of his daughter-in-law. "So you're the young woman who has managed to make my grandson visit the library more than his office," he commented with a knowing smile. "It was about time these books received the attention they deserve." The dinner unfolded like a perfectly choreographed theatrical work. Emily watched fascinated the family interaction, Mrs. Sullivan directing the conversation with a firm hand, James's older brother, Richard, constantly talking about political connections and international business, his wife Claire mechanically nodding while casting evaluative glances at others' jewelry. Only William and James seemed authentic in that scenario of appearances. "And tell me, Miss Parker," Richard's voice broke her observations, "which part of New York is your family from?" The question, seemingly innocent, contained an evident trap. Emily felt James's gaze, tense and concerned, but decided to face the truth directly. "I'm not from New York," she responded calmly. "I grew up in Chicago at St. Elizabeth's Orphanage. I have no known family." The silence that followed was so dense it could have been cut with the silver knife that Claire accidentally dropped, creating a strident clink against the porcelain. "Fascinating," intervened William, breaking the tension. "A person forged by her own decisions and not by family expectations. Refreshing, I'd say." Mrs. Sullivan quickly recovered her composure. "It must have been difficult," she commented in a tone that oscillated between artificial compassion and barely disguised disdain. "It was," confirmed Emily, sustaining her gaze. "But it was also liberating. I could choose my path without the weight of obsolete traditions or inherited prejudices." James nearly choked on his wine, while an amused smile drew itself on William's wrinkled face. "A librarian with claws," murmured the old man, raising his glass in a silent toast to Emily. The conversation drifted to safer topics, but Emily clearly perceived the undercurrents of disapproval emanating from almost all those present. Only William seemed genuinely interested in her opinions on classic American literature and her work in the family library. At the end of dinner, while they had coffee on the terrace under the starry New England sky, William asked Emily to accompany him on a short walk through the gardens. "My grandson has changed since you arrived," he commented without preamble, once they were alone among the flowering magnolias. "I see him more alive, closer to the boy who used to hide in the library to read forbidden poetry." Emily remained silent, unsure how to respond. "The Sullivans have a long tradition of convenient marriages and secret passions," continued the old man, pointing to the illuminated library. "Those letters you found, each generation has their own. Forbidden loves, hearts divided between duty and desire." "You knew about the letters?" asked Emily, surprised. "My dear, in this house, the walls don't just have ears. They also have memory," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "Some of us choose to break the cycle, others perpetuate it. The question is, what will James choose?" Before Emily could process those words, James's voice interrupted them, announcing that the driver was ready to take her back to Brooklyn. During the car ride, Emily remained silent, reflecting on the complexities of the family into which she was unwittingly being introduced. James respected her silence, limiting himself to holding her hand with a mixture of apology and tacit gratitude. Upon stopping in front of her building, he finally spoke. "I'm sorry about tonight. My family can be exactly as I expected," she completed with a tired smile. "Don't worry. I've faced more intimidating academic committees." James laughed, visibly relaxing. "You know what my grandfather told me while you were saying goodbye to my mother? That you're the first woman I've brought home who seems more interested in our library than in our bank account." Emily felt an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest at those words. However, as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment, an uncomfortable sensation persisted. The evening had clearly revealed that, for most of the Sullivans, she was nothing more than an intruder, an anomaly that should be investigated and eventually eliminated from the equation. What she couldn't imagine was that, at that precise moment, Richard Sullivan was making a call to a private investigator, initiating a search into Emily's past that would reveal secrets she herself didn't know. Secrets that would threaten to destroy not only her budding relationship with James, but also the fragile identity she had built for herself. Rain pounded furiously against the windows of Emily's Brooklyn apartment. It was one of those New York storms of late spring, intense but brief, that clean the air and leave a scent of wet earth. Emily watched the drops slide down the glass while holding a cup of tea between her hands, reflecting on the past weeks. Her work at the Sullivan Library was progressing satisfactorily. She had established a cataloging system that was beginning to bring order to the chaos accumulated over generations. But more importantly, her relationship with James had evolved in unexpected ways. What began as professional encounters had transformed into long conversations about literature, music, dreams, and fears, shared by candlelight in the library as the night inexorably advanced. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially with that downpour. Upon opening, she found herself facing a middle-aged man, soaked and with a serious expression. "Emily Parker?" he asked, extending a business card. "I'm Jonathan Reynolds, a notary. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." Intrigued and slightly alarmed, Emily invited him in. The man extracted a large sealed envelope from his briefcase and handed it to her with formality. 3 days ago, Anthony Miller, a bookseller and collector, passed away in Boston, he explained, as Emily opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Among his last wishes was to locate his niece, Emily Parker, born in Chicago 21 years ago. He leaves you his bookstore, Hemingway's Corner, in Boston, and a small sum for its initial maintenance. Emily felt the floor wobble beneath her feet. "There must be a mistake. I don't have a family." The notary shook his head. "The documents are clear, Miss Parker. Mr. Miller was the brother of your mother, Sarah Parker. He searched for you for years but only managed to locate you recently, through your academic publications on 19th century American literature." Emily's hands trembled as she reviewed the documents that certified not only the inheritance, but also something much more valuable, a family connection, a root in the world she had always believed denied to her. "There's one more thing," added the notary, handing her a smaller envelope, yellowed by time. "Mr. Miller left this for you. He said it would explain many things." After the notary's departure, Emily remained motionless in the center of her small living room, holding that envelope as if it contained a bomb about to explode. Finally, she gathered the courage to open it. Inside, she found a handwritten letter and an old photograph of a young woman holding a baby. The resemblance was undeniable, the same eyes, the same face shape, her mother. "Dear Emily, when you read these lines, I will have already departed this world. My greatest remorse is not having had the courage to seek you out earlier, to tell you the truth about your family. Your mother, my sister Sarah, did not abandon you for lack of love. She left you at the orphanage to protect you. She had fallen in love with a married man, powerful and influential in New York City. When she became pregnant, he denied his responsibility, and his family threatened to destroy her if she didn't disappear. Sarah, scared and alone, thought you would be safer away from that family's vengeance. I tried to convince her to get you back when things calmed down, but guilt and shame had marked her. She fell into a deep depression from which she never fully recovered." Sarah now lives in New York, working as a cleaner. She has followed your life from a distance, clipping every mention of you in academic journals, proud but fearful of approaching you. The bookstore I leave you was our refuge as children. I hope that among its books you'll find not only sustenance, but also the roots that were denied to you. With all my love and repentance, Anthony Miller, your uncle. Emily read the letter 3 times, unable to fully process its content. She had a living mother, an uncle who had tried to find her, a family history that explained her abandonment beyond simple neglect or lack of love. Without thinking twice, she took her phone and called James. She needed to share this revelation with someone, and he had become almost imperceptibly the person she trusted most. "I need to see you," she said simply when he answered. An hour later, seated in front of the lit fireplace in his apartment, she showed him the documents and the letter. She carefully observed his reaction as he read, looking for any sign that he knew more than he let on. "It's incredible," he finally commented, returning the letter to her with a shocked expression. "Do you have any idea who this powerful man from New York could be?" Emily shook her head. "The letter doesn't give names, it could be anyone." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, populated with unasked questions and barely contained suspicions. "Will you look for your mother?" James finally asked. Emily contemplated the photograph, passing her fingers over the face of the woman who held her with evident love. "I don't know. All my life I believed she didn't want me, that she had abandoned me without looking back. Now I discover she left me for protection and has been following my life from a distance. It's too much to assimilate at once." James took her hands in his. "Whatever your decision, I'll be by your side." But something had changed between them. A shadow of doubt had settled in Emily's gaze. The coincidence was too great, falling in love precisely with the son of one of the most powerful families in New York City, the same city where her mother apparently lived, and where an influential man had denied his paternity. "Did you know about this?" she asked directly, withdrawing her hands. "Is that why you approached me in the library that day?" James's expression reflected genuine surprise, followed by pain at the implication. "You think I sought you out because of some connection to your past? Emily, I didn't even know you were an orphan until you told me." Emily wanted to believe him, but the pieces fit together too perfectly to be mere coincidence. Her survival instinct, sharpened by years of solitude, advised caution. "I need time," she finally said. "Time to process all this, to decide what to do with the bookstore in Boston, whether to look for my mother." "Of course," he replied, though it was evident that Emily's sudden emotional distance had hurt him. "Just remember that you're not alone in this, unless you want to be." When James left, the rain had ceased. Emily remained awake all night, contemplating her mother's photograph and rereading the inheritance documents. A decision began to form in her mind: to travel to Boston, to get to know the inherited bookstore, to seek more answers among those books that had been the childhood refuge of her mother and uncle. What Emily was unaware of was that Richard Sullivan had obtained all this information weeks earlier, long before the notary appeared at her door. That her uncle's sudden death had accelerated a plan intended to permanently separate her from James, revealing a family past intertwined with the Sullivans in ways that not even she could imagine. And so, as dawn tinged Brooklyn's rooftops pink, Emily packed a small suitcase, determined to find for herself the answers she needed, not suspecting that each step toward her past would inexorably bring her closer to a future with James, despite all the forces conspiring to keep them apart. Boston welcomed Emily with an embrace of stone and history. The historic city, nestled between hills and surrounded by its iconic bay, seemed a perfect setting to find answers about her past. The narrow, cobblestone streets guided her to the historic district, where a small worn wooden sign announced Hemingway's Corner Antique and Rare Books. The tinkling of an old bell accompanied her entry into the bookstore. The smell of old paper, leather and dust welcomed her like an old friend, reminding her that regardless of her origin, books had always been her true family. The space was small but cozy. Dark wooden shelves filled with volumes of all sizes reached the ceiling. A mobile ladder allowed access to the upper levels, and a carved oak counter presided over the back of the premises. On it, a framed photograph showed a smiling, elderly man surrounded by books. Her uncle Anthony. "Can I help you?" asked a voice behind her. Emily turned to find a man of about 60 with metal-framed glasses and a kind expression. "I'm Emily Parker," she introduced herself. "Anthony's niece." The man's face lit up with recognition. "At last. Anthony talked about you constantly. I'm Matthew. I helped your uncle at the bookstore for 20 years. I'm glad you've come." In the hours that followed, Matthew showed her the operation of the store, explained the cataloging system Anthony had developed, and shared anecdotes about her uncle that painted a portrait of a passionate, generous, and deeply family-oriented man despite the distance. "The apartment is upstairs," explained Matthew, pointing to a small staircase in the back. "Anthony prepared it, hoping that someday you would come to stay." The apartment turned out to be a lofted space with exposed beams, a small kitchen, a modest bathroom, and a bright bedroom with views of the historic Boston skyline. But what immediately caught Emily's attention was the wall covered with photographs. She approached with a racing heart and discovered her own life documented in images. Emily at 5 in the orphanage courtyard, Emily receiving a reading award at 10, Emily at her high school graduation, Emily collecting her university diploma. "Your uncle hired a private investigator," explained Matthew from the doorway. "He wanted to know you, but feared you would reject contact. He kept every photo, every clipping about your academic achievements like a treasure." The tears that Emily had contained since her arrival in Boston finally found their outlet. Not only for the uncle she never knew, but for the revelation that she had never really been alone. Someone had followed her, had celebrated her successes from afar, had kept her memory alive in a family she believed non-existent. That night, after Matthew left promising to return the next morning to help her with the inventory, Emily explored every corner of the apartment. In the drawer of the nightstand, she found a leather-bound diary with an attached note. "For Emily, when she's ready to know the whole truth. Anthony." With trembling fingers, she opened the diary and began to read. These were her uncle's memoirs, written specifically for her, narrating the story of the Parker siblings, Sarah, her mother, and Anthony, growing up in America of the 80s, their dreams, their difficulties. And finally, the story of Sarah's love affair with a married man from New York high society. William Sullivan was 30 years older than Sarah, but he possessed a devastating charm and a culture that captivated my sister from the first moment. He was a regular customer at our family bookstore in New York, looking for first editions for his personal collection. Sarah, freshly graduated in literature and working in the store, was an easy prey for his attentions. Emily dropped the diary as if it burned. William Sullivan, the same name as James's grandfather. The coincidence was impossible in a city the size of New York. Could it be possible that the elderly man who had treated her with such kindness during the family dinner was actually her biological grandfather? With her heart pounding in her chest, she resumed reading, eager to confirm or deny her suspicion. When Sarah told him about her pregnancy, William initially promised to divorce and recognize the baby. But his wife, Catherine, of even more aristocratic lineage than his, threatened to destroy our entire family if he kept his word. They used their influence to ruin our family business, and the harassment reached such a point that Sarah, fearing for the life of her unborn baby, fled to Chicago, where she gave birth in solitude. The revelation hit Emily like a hammer. Catherine, the same woman who had observed her with disdain during dinner, was the betrayed wife. And William, the kind patriarch, was her biological grandfather, the man who had denied her existence to maintain family peace. But there was more. The following pages revealed that Anthony had maintained sporadic contact with William over the years, selling him rare manuscripts to finance the search for Emily. The old man had followed her life from a distance, through the news that Anthony provided him, although he never dared to seek her out directly for fear of Catherine's reaction. When he learned that you had gotten a job at the New York Public Library, William became concerned. It was too close to the Sullivans' circle of influence. He asked me to warn you, but my illness was advancing, and I couldn't find a way to approach you without revealing truths for which you might not be prepared. The last entry in the diary, with handwriting trembling from illness, contained an apology and a warning. "Forgive me for not being braver, for not seeking you out earlier. Sarah now lives as a cleaner in one of the Sullivans' office buildings, subsisting on the little they pay her, and tormented by the memory of the baby she left behind. As for William, I fear his recent interest in you is not innocent. He has mentioned his grandson, James, several times in our conversations. Be cautious, my dear niece. The Sullivans protect what's theirs fiercely, and you, without knowing it, represent the greatest threat to their perfect public image. Emily closed the diary, overwhelmed by the revelations. Everything fit together in a terrible way. Her casual encounter with James, the old man's interest in her, even her sudden hiring to catalogue the family library. Had it all been an elaborate manipulation? Was James involved in this game of deception? Or was he as much a victim as she was of his grandfather's machinations? Unable to sleep, Emily spent the rest of the night reviewing every interaction, every word, every gesture shared with James and his family, looking for clues she might have overlooked. By dawn, she had made a decision. She would remain in Boston indefinitely, running the inherited bookstore until she could clarify her feelings and determine her next step. With trembling hands, she wrote a brief message to James. I need time. Please don't try to contact me until I do so. Emily. What she didn't know was that at that same moment, James was receiving in his office a detailed report from the private investigator hired by his brother Richard, revealing not only Emily's biological relationship with William, but also locating Sarah Parker as part of the cleaning staff in the Sullivans' corporate building in New York City. Two parallel truths were advancing toward an inevitable collision, while Emily, sheltered among the books that had been the refuge of her maternal family, tried to reconstruct an identity fragmented by revelations that changed everything she thought she knew about herself and about the man with whom, despite the doubts and the pain, she had fallen hopelessly in love. The small apartment above Hemingway's Corner had become Emily's refuge during the past 3 weeks. Boston, with its cobblestone streets and its imposing historical buildings, offered her a perfect setting for introspection and the emotional distance she so badly needed. The bookstore was prospering surprisingly. Emily had modernized some aspects of the business, creating a small literary cafe in one corner and organizing evening readings that attracted both tourists and residents. Matthew, faithful to Anthony's memory, helped her with the inventory and introduced her to regular customers, many of whom shared anecdotes about her uncle that painted an increasingly complete portrait of the man she never got to know. However, the apparent external calm hid an inner storm. Emily barely slept, divided between the pain of the revelations about her origin, James's absence, and doubts about his true intentions. Had it all been an elaborate manipulation orchestrated by William, or did a genuine feeling exist between her and James, independent of family secrets? That Thursday morning, while preparing the bookstore to open, the tinkling of the bell announced an unexpectedly early visitor. Emily looked up from the book she was cataloguing to find a middle-aged woman, thin and with prematurely grey hair, tied back in a simple ponytail. Her hands, reddened and rough, revealed years of physical work. "Good morning," greeted Emily with professional kindness. "We're not officially open yet, but you're welcome to look around if you'd like." The woman remained motionless by the door, observing Emily with an intensity that was disturbing. Her eyes, identical to those Emily saw each morning in the mirror, filled with contained tears. "Emily," she finally pronounced, with a broken voice. "My Emily." The book Emily was holding fell to the floor with a dull thud that resonated in the sudden silence of the bookstore. She needed no introduction or explanation. She instinctively knew who this woman was, with the fragile appearance but determined gaze. "Mum," she responded in a whisper, the word strange on her lips after 21 years without pronouncing it. Sarah Parker took a tentative step toward her daughter, stopping at a prudent distance, as if fearing that a sudden movement could break the fragile moment they shared. "I didn't expect to find you here," confessed Sarah. "I came to collect Anthony's belongings. The notary notified me of his death just a few days ago." Emily nodded, momentarily unable to form coherent words. Part of her wanted to embrace this woman, who had carried her in her womb. Another wanted to scream at her for years of abandonment and absence. Instead, she did the only thing that seemed appropriate in that space surrounded by stories: invite her to tell her own. "There's fresh coffee," she offered, indicating the small reading area, "and we have a lot to talk about." During the next 2 hours, Sarah narrated her story with a trembling but sincere voice. She confirmed what Anthony's diary had already revealed: her relationship with William Sullivan, the unexpected pregnancy, Catherine's threats, the heartbreaking decision to leave Emily at the orphanage to protect her from the destructive influence of the Sullivans. "When things calmed down, I tried to get you back," explained Sarah, her hands clutching the coffee cup like a lifeline. "But the adoption system in those years, they told me you had been assigned to a foreign family. Anthony discovered years later that it was a lie, that you remained at the orphanage. But by then my life was destroyed. I had become a shadow, incapable of offering you the home you deserved." Emily listened in silence, assimilating each word, each justification, each lament. "Why now?" she finally asked. 21 years have passed. Why do you appear just when I discover my connection to the Sullivans?" Sarah visibly paled. You know? "William and the whole family," confirmed Emily with bitterness. "I've been cataloguing their library for weeks. I've dined at their table. I fell in love with James, his grandson." The horror on Sarah's face was genuine and devastating. "It can't be. He's your half-uncle." "My God, Emily, he's family." "We don't share blood," Emily quickly clarified. "James is the grandson of Catherine and William, but through their oldest son, Richard. According to Anthony's diary, I'm William's daughter from an extramarital relationship. There is no blood relationship between James and me." The relief on Sarah's face was evident, but the concern didn't disappear completely. "Still, it's dangerous," she warned. "The Sullivans won't allow their reputation to be tarnished with a scandal like this. Catherine would move heaven and earth to separate you from James if she knew who you really are." Emily remained silent, processing the implications. Finally, the question that had been circling her mind found voice. "Does James know who I am? Has all this been a family strategy to keep me controlled?" Sarah emphatically denied it. "I don't think so. William has always kept our secret jealously guarded. If Catherine doesn't know after so many years, I doubt James has the slightest idea." An invisible weight seemed to lift from Emily's chest. The possibility that James's feelings were genuine, not manipulated by prior knowledge of her identity, renewed a hope she had tried to suppress for weeks. "What should I do?" she asked, more to herself than to her newly found mother. Sarah took her hands with tenderness, the first physical contact between them since she was a baby. "That's something only you can decide, my child. But whatever your decision, this time I'll be here to support you. I've lost 21 years of your life. I don't intend to lose even one more." That same day, while Emily and Sarah began the delicate process of reconstructing a mother-daughter relationship from scratch, in New York events were precipitating. Richard Sullivan had finally placed the private investigator's report on his mother's desk, revealing not only Emily's identity, but also William's betrayal decades ago. The fury of Catherine Sullivan, contained by years of apparent social perfection, was unleashed like a hurricane upon the family. Her first target was James, whom she considered complicit in a conspiracy to publicly humiliate her. James, unaware of the true nature of the connection between Emily and his grandfather, found himself caught in a web of family secrets that threatened to destroy not only his relationship with Emily, but also the already fragile health of William. And so, while in Boston, mother and daughter shared memories and built bridges over decades of absence. In New York, a family crisis was unfolding that would soon reach Emily, forcing her to make decisions that would determine not only her future with James, but also her own identity as an involuntary part of two families separated by pride, power, and secrets buried for too long. New York Presbyterian Hospital maintained that particular silence of medical centers during the early morning hours. A superficial quietude interrupted by the occasional beeping of monitors, whispers of medical staff, and the distant rumor of the city that never completely sleeps. James Sullivan had been sitting for 5 hours in the same uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed where his grandfather, William, struggled to breathe while connected to multiple tubes and machines. The heart attack had come a few hours after the confrontation with Catherine, when she publicly accused him, before the entire assembled family, of having stained the Sullivan name with a bastard and having maintained the lie for decades. The hospital room was a perfect reflection of the family situation, aseptic, cold, with an appearance of control but traversed by underground currents of chaotic emotions. Richard and Catherine had briefly passed through, more concerned with containing the scandal than with the patriarch's health. Only James remained constant, divided between love for his grandfather and shock over the recent revelations. Emily was his cousin, or something like that, the illegitimate daughter of his grandfather with a bookseller, an unrecognized Sullivan. The personal and family implications intertwined in his mind like an impossible skein to untangle. The sound of his phone broke the silence. A message from an unknown number. "I'm in the hospital cafeteria, we need to talk. Sarah Parker." James looked at his grandfather, motionless under the hospital sheets, and then at the door. After indicating to the nurse that he would return soon, he headed to the cafeteria, guided by a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He recognized her immediately, though he had never seen her before. Sarah Parker had the same expressive eyes as Emily, though marked by decades of suffering. Seated in the farthest corner of the deserted cafeteria, she held a coffee she wasn't drinking, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "Mrs. Parker," greeted James, sitting across from her. "Thank you for coming," she replied, studying his face intently. "Emily doesn't know I'm here. We reconnected just a few days ago in Boston, after 21 years. James nodded, unsure how to respond. The mention of Emily provoked a simultaneous pang of pain and longing. "How is William?" asked Sarah, and James detected a note of genuine concern in her voice. "Stable but critical," he responded. "The doctors speak of significant heart damage." Sarah briefly closed her eyes, as if processing the information. "I'm sorry. Despite everything, I never wished him ill." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, until James broke it with the inevitable question. "Why are you here, Mrs. Parker?" Sarah breathed deeply before answering. "Because two people I love are suffering unnecessarily. My daughter in Boston believing that everything she lived with you could be part of a family manipulation. And William here, paying the price of secrets kept too long." "I didn't know anything." James defended himself, the frustration evident in his voice. "I found out about Emily's existence as my grandfather's daughter, the same day he suffered the heart attack. How could I have been part of a manipulation I was completely unaware of?" Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of deception and finding only genuine confusion and pain. "I believe you," she finally said. "And it's important that Emily knows too. She fears that all your encounters, from the first one in the library, were orchestrated by your family." James ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of desperation. "Our first meeting was completely accidental. I went to the library looking for documents for a restoration project. I had never seen her before, and when I began visiting her regularly, it was because I was captivated by her passion for books, her intelligence. I had no idea of her connection to my grandfather." Sarah nodded, satisfied with the answer. "William has been secretly paying for medical treatments for me for years," she revealed. "Breast cancer, diagnosed 5 years ago. He stayed in touch with Anthony, the brother who helped me when everyone else turned their backs on me. In his twisted way, he was trying to compensate for the damage caused." This new revelation hit James like another expansive wave of an earthquake that wouldn't stop producing aftershocks. "Does Emily know?" "Not the whole truth," admitted Sarah. "She knows that William maintained contact with Anthony and that he followed her life from afar. But she doesn't know that he has been financing my treatments, or that it was he who indirectly facilitated Anthony leaving her the bookstore as an inheritance." James was trying to process all this information when his phone rang urgently. It was his grandfather's nurse. William had awakened and was insistently asking for him. "I must go," he apologized, standing up hastily. "Wait," Sarah stopped him, handing him a small envelope. "It's the address of the bookstore in Boston. Emily is there reorganizing her life, trying to understand her place in this tangled story. If you truly love her, regardless of family secrets, go find her." James took the envelope, momentarily doubting. What if she doesn't want to see me? Her last message was pretty clear about needing distance. Sarah smiled with the wisdom that only comes from lost battles and wasted opportunities. Sometimes, distance is precisely what we need to see clearly. Emily has found answers in Boston, but also new questions that only you can help her answer. As James hurriedly returned to the hospital room, the envelope safely stored in the inner pocket of his jacket like a tempting promise, Sarah remained in the cafeteria, observing the New York dawn through the windows. 21 years ago, she had fled from this same city with a broken heart and a soul shattered by guilt. Now she returned not only as a reunited mother, but also as an unexpected bridge between two generations of Sullivans. In the hospital room, William Sullivan looked at his grandson with tired but lucid eyes and pronounced the words that would definitively change the course of this story. "Forgive me, James. I have lived too long hiding truths out of fear. But there is something you need to know about Emily, about you, and about what really happened 21 years ago." The confession that followed, pronounced with a weak but determined voice by a man who was finally facing his own demons, would provide the final piece of the puzzle that James needed to make the most important decision of his life: to remain trapped in family expectations or to risk everything for the woman who, against all probability and despite the secrets, had captured his heart between pages of old books and promises not yet written. Boston gleamed under a spring sun that gilded its historic stones. The small bookstore Hemingway's Corner had closed early that Friday, with a handwritten sign on the door announcing, "Closed for inventory." The real reason, however, was much more personal. Emily, seated among piles of old books on the wooden floor, was classifying photographs and documents found in the attic. Fragments of Anthony and Sarah's lives, pieces of her own family history that she was trying to reconstruct like a patient archaeologist. The sound of the bell startled her. No one should be calling. Matthew had a key, and her mother had briefly traveled to New York to resolve pending matters, as she had enigmatically said that morning. Upon opening the door, time seemed to stand still. James Sullivan, with a tired but determined appearance, was holding a bouquet of wildflowers and an old book that Emily immediately recognized, the first edition of The Great Gatsby that she had admired during her first day at the estate library. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice revealing an unusual insecurity in a habitually confident man. Emily silently stepped aside, allowing him to enter the space that had been her refuge for weeks. The small bookstore, with its smell of old paper and polished wood, seemed to contract in the imposing presence of James. "How did you find me?" Emily asked, maintaining a prudent distance. "Your mother," he replied simply. "She came to see me at the hospital." "At the hospital?" The concern was instantaneous and involuntary. "Is she—" "She's fine," James quickly clarified. "She went to see my grandfather. William suffered a heart attack a few days ago, after the whole truth came to light in a family confrontation." Emily placed a hand on her chest, processing the news. Despite the complexity of her feelings toward William, the idea of his suffering was painful to her. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "How is he?" "Stable. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." James placed the book and the flowers on the counter, like a peace offering. "But I haven't come to talk about my grandfather, Emily. I've come for us." The word us floated between them, laden with meaning and unasked questions. "Is there an us, James?" Emily asked directly. "After so many secrets, so many coincidences that no longer seem like coincidences?" James took a step toward her, still maintaining a respectful distance. "That depends on whether you believe what we lived was real or part of some twisted family manipulation." Emily studied his face, looking for signs of deception and finding only honest vulnerability. Still, the doubts persisted. "Did you know who I was when we met? When you started visiting me at the library? When you offered me a job cataloging your collection?" "No," he responded without hesitation. "I found out about your connection to my grandfather the same day he suffered the heart attack. Richard hired a private investigator who discovered everything. Your birth, the abandonment, even that Sarah worked as a cleaner in one of our buildings. He used it as a weapon against my grandfather without caring about the consequences." Emily processed this information in silence. Finally, the question she most feared to formulate found voice. "Did it change anything for you? Discovering that I am, technically, part of your family." James moved another step closer, now close enough to take her hands if she would allow it. "It changed everything and nothing at once. It explains the immediate connection I felt with you, that sense of recognition that I attributed to intellectual affinity. But it doesn't change what I feel, except perhaps to make it more complex, deeper. We're practically cousins," Emily pointed out, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't share blood," James contradicted. "My grandfather isn't my biological grandfather. My father, Richard, is the son of Catherine's first marriage. William adopted him when he married her. But there is no blood relationship between us." This revelation fell on Emily like cold water, clearing the mists of ethical doubts that had clouded her mind. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't know," admitted James. "Or rather, I knew it, but as an unimportant family fact. Until my grandfather told me the whole truth from his hospital bed." Walking to the small reading area, James indicated to Emily to sit down, preparing for a conversation that would definitively change the course of their lives. "My grandfather confessed something to me that not even your mother knows," he began, carefully choosing his words. "After leaving you at the orphanage, Sarah fell into a deep depression. She tried to commit suicide twice. William, tormented by guilt, secretly admitted her to a private clinic, using connections that not even Catherine knew about." Emily listened with a heavy heart, imagining the suffering of a mother separated from her daughter. For years, he financially supported Sarah and Anthony, ensuring they were okay but maintaining the distance that Catherine demanded. When Sarah finally recovered enough to seek work, he discreetly arranged for her to be hired as a cleaner in one of our buildings, where he could protect her without raising suspicions. And why did he never try to find me? Acknowledge me? The question emerged from the core of the pain Emily had carried all her life. James took her hands in his, and this time Emily didn't withdraw them. "He did, in his twisted way. He financed Anthony to look for you, to follow your steps from afar. It was he who, through contacts at City Hall, ensured you got the position at the New York Public Library when it became vacant." The pieces were beginning to fit into a painful but coherent puzzle. "Our meeting," Emily began, "was absolutely casual," James affirmed vehemently. "My grandfather had no idea I frequented that library, nor that I had met you. When I began talking about you during our private conversations, he nearly had an attack right then. He tried to dissuade me from continuing to see you, but it was already too late." "Too late?" James's smile contained a bittersweet mixture of sadness and hope. "I had fallen in love with you, with your passion for books, with your intelligence, with your capacity to create your own world despite abandonment and solitude. When he finally connected who you were, he tried to separate me from you without revealing the truth, but he only succeeded in making me grow closer." Emily processed these revelations with a mind that tried to maintain objectivity despite the emotional storm. "And now what?" she finally asked. "Catherine knows the truth. Your entire family knows I'm William's illegitimate daughter. They won't want me near you, the family company, anything that bears the Sullivan name." James gently squeezed her hands. "Now we have to decide what's more important, satisfying others' expectations or building something of our own, based on who we really are, not on what others want us to be." The proposal floated between them like a dangerous and tempting promise. Emily looked around at the small bookstore that represented her newly discovered family heritage, at the books that had always been her refuge, and finally at James, whose eyes reflected a determination that resonated with her own resilient nature. "It won't be easy," she warned. "The best stories never are," he replied, and the smile they shared sealed a silent pact to face together whatever might come. Neither suspected that at that precise moment, Catherine Sullivan was making decisions that would test their newly formed commitment in ways that not even the books surrounding them, with all their intricate plots and dramatic turns, could have anticipated. The conference room of Sullivan Investments, located on the top floor of the family's most emblematic building in New York City, was immersed in a tense silence. Catherine Sullivan, impeccably dressed despite recent events, presided over the table with the rigidity of someone who has spent decades maintaining appearances at any cost. "The documents are clear," explained the family lawyer, a middle-aged man accustomed to discreetly resolving the problems of New York high society. "Mr. William Sullivan modified his will 3 weeks ago. In case of his passing, half of his personal shares in the group would go to James and the other half to Emily Parker." The murmur of indignation that ran through the table was instantaneous. Richard Sullivan, the oldest son and current CEO of the group, hit the table with his fist. "Unacceptable! That woman cannot have control over the family business. She doesn't carry our blood." Catherine raised a hand, silencing her son with an imperious gesture. "Technically, she carries William's blood more directly than some present here," she pointed out, with calculated coldness. "But that's not the point. The issue is that William, in a fit of senile sentimentality, has put at risk the legacy we've built for generations. The lawyer uncomfortably cleared his throat. There's more, Mrs. Sullivan. Mr. William has also legally recognized Emily as his daughter. The documents have already been submitted. When he recovers, Emily Parker will officially become Emily Sullivan Parker. This time the silence that followed was absolute, heavy as lead. Catherine Sullivan, pale but controlled, slowly rose. That would mean she has the right to claim part of the complete family inheritance, not just the specific shares mentioned in the will, she concluded with an icy voice. Exactly, confirmed the lawyer, unless she signs an explicit renunciation of such rights. Catherine nodded, as if she had been expecting precisely this information. Gentlemen, I need the room. Richard, stay. When everyone had left, mother and son remained silent for several minutes, contemplating the panorama of New York City that stretched below them like a kingdom that suddenly found itself threatened. What are you thinking of doing? Richard finally asked, studying his mother's imperturbable face. Offering Miss Parker a deal, Catherine replied with calculated precision. A considerable sum in exchange for her renunciation of any rights over the Sullivan name and its assets. And if she refuses the money? Catherine's smile was almost imperceptible, but undoubtedly threatening. Everyone has a price, Richard. It's just a matter of finding the right currency. While this conversation was taking place in New York, Emily and James were walking together through Boston's streets. After the intensity of their confessions in the bookstore, they both needed fresh air and the perspective that only comes from walking without a fixed destination. What will you do with the bookstore? James asked as they passed in front of Trinity Church. Emily reflected before answering. I'd like to keep it. It's my connection to a part of my family I never really knew. Besides, Matthew needs the job, and the regular customers greatly appreciated Anthony. James nodded, understanding the importance of that space for her. You could run it remotely if you wanted. Hire additional help. Are you suggesting I return to New York? Emily asked, stopping to look at him directly. I'm suggesting we consider all the options, he replied cautiously. My life is primarily in New York, but I could reorganize it if you decided to stay here. Or we could find a middle ground. Emily smiled at the obviousness of what was happening. They were making plans together, imagining a shared future despite the family complications and newly revealed secrets. What about your work? The family company? She asked, aware of the implications of any decision. James sighed, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture that Emily had come to recognize as a sign of deep reflection. I've been thinking a lot about that. For years I've followed the path traced by my family, the proper career, the executive position in the company, the appropriate social connections, but I've never really asked myself what I want. And what do you want? The question floated between them, laden with possibilities. To remember what it feels like to be alive, he replied with unexpected sincerity. Since I met you, I've rediscovered parts of myself that I had buried beneath others' expectations. My passion for literature, my interest in architectural restoration beyond economic benefit, my desire to create something of my own. Emily took his hand as they continued walking, this time with a more defined purpose. We could start something together, she suggested. Something that combines your business experience with my knowledge of old books. Perhaps a publishing house specialized in recovering forgotten texts, or a cultural center. The idea was interrupted by the sound of James's phone. Seeing the screen, his expression turned grave. It's from the hospital, he explained before answering. The conversation was brief but intense. When he hung up, his face reflected a complex mixture of emotions. My grandfather has had a relapse. The doctors say he needs to see us, both of us, urgently. The journey to New York passed mostly in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts as the highway devoured miles beneath the wheels of James's car. They arrived at the hospital after 9 at night, when the city's lights began to reflect on the Hudson River like liquid stars. To the surprise of both, they found not only William conscious and sitting up in the hospital bed, but also Sarah, seated beside him with an expression of calm that dramatically contrasted with the tension of the environment. You've arrived, announced William with a weak but firm voice. Now we can talk about the future, not just past mistakes. Emily felt James's hand intertwine with hers, a gesture of solidarity in the face of what would clearly be a crucial conversation. Catherine has called a family meeting for tomorrow. William continued without preamble. "She plans to offer you a considerable sum in exchange for renouncing the Sullivan name and any rights to the family business." "I haven't asked for any of that," protested Emily, genuinely surprised. "I didn't even know you had initiated procedures to legally recognize me." William exchanged a look with Sarah before responding. "It was the least I could do after decades of cowardice. I should have done it when you were born, but I chose family peace over paternal responsibility. It's a mistake I've regretted every day since then." Sarah intervened softly. "William and I have been talking these days. There are many old wounds, but also the possibility of healing for all of us." James, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "What do you want, grandfather?" "Not what you think you should do to compensate for the past, but what you really want now." The question seemed to surprise William, as if no one had asked him about his true desires in decades. "I want peace," he finally replied. "I want to see my family united before I depart, not divided by secrets and resentment. I want my daughter to occupy the place that corresponds to her. And I want my grandson to be free to choose his own path, not the one others have traced for him." Emily approached the hospital bed, taking the old man's hand in hers. Despite the pain of abandonment, the unanswered questions over the years, she felt an undeniable connection to this man whose blood ran in her veins. "I don't want your money or your name," she said firmly. "I just want the opportunity to know you, to understand where I come from. The rest are labels that others value more than I do." William smiled, his eyes bright with contained tears. "You're so much like your mother at your age. The same determination, the same integrity." Sarah joined them, completing a family circle that was finally beginning to close after decades of distance and pain. "So, what do we do tomorrow?" asked James, always practical. "Catherine expects to impose her terms, and she's not accustomed to receiving refusals." William smiled with a spark of the astuteness that had made him one of the most successful businessmen in America. "Tomorrow, for the first time in 60 years of marriage, Catherine Sullivan will discover that not all battles are won with money or threats." When Emily and James left the hospital that night, something had fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer simply two people facing external obstacles, but part of a complex family web that was redefining itself before their eyes. "Are you prepared for tomorrow?" James asked, as he drove toward the small hotel where Emily would stay. She contemplated the lights of New York City, the city that had unconsciously always been part of her history. "I'm not sure anyone can prepare to face Catherine Sullivan, but I have something she will never understand." "What's that?" Emily smiled with a newly discovered confidence. "The certainty that my worth doesn't depend on a surname or a bank account. And that makes me stronger than her." That night, while New York slept under a starry sky, 4 people in different parts of the city contemplated the imminent dawn with the certainty that, for better or worse, nothing would ever be the same after the family meeting scheduled for noon the next day. The main office of the Sullivan mansion gleamed under the golden light filtering through ancient windows. Polished oak furniture, tapestries inherited for generations, and family portraits created the perfect setting for what was about to become a defining moment for all those present. Catherine Sullivan, seated behind the imposing desk that had belonged to her father-in-law, maintained the rigid posture that had characterized her during decades of social reign in New York City. To her right, Richard observed with an impassive expression. The rest of the family had been excluded from this particular meeting. When Emily entered, accompanied by James, the tension in the atmosphere perceptibly intensified. To Catherine's surprise, Sarah and William also appeared, the latter in a wheelchair, but with a determination in his gaze that his wife hadn't seen in years. "This is a private conversation, William," Catherine declared coldly. "Your presence is neither necessary nor advisable given your state of health." William smiled serenely. "On the contrary, dear, this conversation should have happened 21 years ago, and I don't intend to miss even one more minute." Catherine pressed her lips but didn't insist, an indication of the residual respect she still maintained for the patriarch despite everything. Instead, she directed her attention to Emily, evaluating her with critical eyes. "Miss Parker," she began with excessive formality, "I understand that the recent discoveries about your connection with our family have been disturbing. I am willing to offer a generous compensation that will allow you to establish yourself comfortably wherever you wish, in exchange for your absolute discretion and formal renunciation of any claim to the Sullivan name or its assets. Emily remained serene, sustaining the gaze of the woman who observed her as an inconvenience that needed to be efficiently eliminated. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Sullivan," she replied, with a calmness that surprised even James. "But I haven't come to negotiate economic compensations or to claim surnames. I've come to talk about family, truth, and possible futures." Catherine narrowed her eyes, distrustful of this unexpected response. "What is it that you want, then?" "Peace," Emily replied simply. "The same that all of us present need after decades of secrets and pain." William moved slightly forward in his wheelchair. "Catherine, for 40 years you have kept this family united with admirable determination, sometimes sacrificing happiness for the appearance of perfection. But the time of secrets is over. And what exactly are you proposing?" she asked, addressing exclusively her husband as if the others weren't present. "A new beginning," William responded. "I will formally recognize Emily as my daughter, as I should have done when she was born. A part of my personal inheritance will legally correspond to her, but not the family business, which will remain under Richard's majority control." Catherine processed this information in silence, calculating implications and possible scandals. "And regarding James and Emily," William continued, "their relationship is exclusively their business. There is no moral or legal impediment, as you well know." James stepped forward, speaking for the first time since their arrival. "There's something else, grandmother. I've made a decision regarding my future in the family business." Catherine's attention immediately centered on her grandson, her most known and least admitted weakness. "I'm resigning from my executive position at Sullivan Investments," he declared firmly. "I'll maintain my shares as a passive shareholder, but my professional path will follow another direction." "Absurd," exclaimed Richard, intervening for the first time. "You've been prepared for years to assume key responsibilities." "Responsibilities I never asked for," James replied calmly. "I've always been the piece that fit into your plans. I was never allowed to develop my own." Emily observed the exchange with a mixture of admiration and concern. James's decision, though previously discussed between them, would have profound consequences for their joint future. "And what do you plan to do?" asked Catherine, her voice betraying for the first time a genuine emotion, concern for the future of her favorite grandson. James looked at Emily before responding, a shared smile that contained promises and plans yet to be fully revealed. "Emily and I are developing a joint project, a cultural foundation dedicated to the preservation and dissemination of American literary heritage, starting with the restoration of the estate as a cultural center open to the public." Sarah, who had remained silent, finally intervened. "I've also made decisions. I'll sell the apartment Anthony left me in Boston to establish myself again in New York. Emily and I have 21 years to recover." Catherine contemplated the four, united in a common front she never would have anticipated. For the first time in decades, she found herself without absolute control of the situation. After a silence that seemed eternal, she asked the only question that really mattered to her. "What will happen to the Sullivan name? To our reputation?" William took his wife's hand with surprising tenderness. "The name will survive as it has for generations. Perhaps it will even emerge strengthened by demonstrating that we are capable of recognizing mistakes and correcting them. True strength, Catherine, is not in apparent perfection, but in the capacity to grow from our own mistakes." Something imperceptible changed in Catherine's expression. It wasn't surrender, for women like her never surrendered, but perhaps the recognition that this particular battle could not be won with the usual strategies. "I will need time," she finally said. "Time to assimilate these changes and to get to know my granddaughter." The word granddaughter, pronounced with evident effort but also with an undeniable recognition, fell like a drop in calm waters, creating ripples that expanded toward a future different from what any of those present had imagined just a few weeks earlier. Emily felt James's hand tighten around hers, a simple gesture that contained complex promises. Beside her, Sarah smiled with the peace of someone who finally sees the knots of the past resolved. William, in his wheelchair, seemed to have dropped an invisible weight he had carried for decades. 6 months later, the old Sullivan estate shone renewed under the American autumn sun. The doors that for generations had remained closed to the public were officially opening today to inaugurate the Sullivan Parker Cultural Center, a space dedicated to literature, art, and the preservation of American heritage. In the main courtyard, where the colonial fountain sang its aquatic melody, a small stage had been set up for the inaugural ceremony. Emily, elegant in a simple blue dress, observed with contained emotion the attendees occupying the chairs arranged in a semicircle. Sarah and William conversed animatedly in the front row, their renewed friendship one of the unexpected miracles of these months. Catherine, seated beside them with her usual dignity, had evolved from initial resistance to a cautious acceptance that, on occasions, showed glimpses of genuine affection for Emily. Matthew had traveled from Boston for the inauguration, bringing news of the small bookstore he now ran with the help of 2 university students, keeping Anthony's legacy alive under Emily's remote supervision. When James went up on stage to give the official welcome, Emily couldn't help but remember the path traveled since that first encounter at the New York Public Library, when their hands brushed while picking up fallen manuscripts. So much had changed since then, and yet the essential remained: the love for books, for the stories that connect lives across time and circumstances. "Welcome to the Sullivan Parker Cultural Center," James began, his voice resonating clearly in the American courtyard. "This space is born from the profound belief that books, like people, deserve second chances. They deserve to be rediscovered, reinterpreted, loved again." His eyes found Emily's among the audience, transmitting a silent message of complicity and love. "Each book in our library has a story to tell, not just the one printed on its pages, but also that of the hands that have held it, the eyes that have read it, the hearts it has touched. Like people, books are reminders that the most important stories are those that continue to be written, chapter by chapter, despite obstacles." Emily went up on stage to join him in the symbolic ribbon cutting. As the scissors closed on the red ribbon, she whispered so only he could hear her, "May I continue?" James smiled, recognizing the phrase he had pronounced that first day in the library, when he asked if he could continue reading a passage from Fitzgerald. "Always," he replied, intertwining his fingers with hers as applause officially marked the opening of the cultural center. Hours later, when most of the guests had departed, Emily and James wandered tranquilly through the completely restored library. The aroma of old books now mingled with that of fresh flowers and freshly brewed coffee from the small literary cafe installed in one of the courtyards. "Do you know what your grandmother told me today?" commented Emily, stopping in front of the showcase where that first edition of The Great Gatsby that she had so admired months ago was proudly displayed. "Surprise me," replied James, encircling her waist with an arm. "She said she finally understands why you fell in love with me," Emily smiled. "Apparently, my cataloguing of the family library was impeccably professional, and my decision to keep personal documents separate from literary texts demonstrates a respect for family history worthy of admiration." James laughed, perfectly recognizing his grandmother's tone. "Coming from her, that's practically a declaration of eternal love." Emily turned within his arms to look at him directly. "And you? Are you still convinced of our decision to exchange corporate careers for a cultural foundation?" "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "For the first time in my adult life, I wake up each morning with my own purpose, not an inherited one." The scent of New York magnolias filtered through the open windows, reminding them of that first encounter that had triggered everything. Emily stretched up to kiss him softly, a gesture that contained promises of shared futures, of chapters yet to be written. "Then," she whispered against his lips, "may we continue?" James's response remained suspended in the air when the sound of footsteps interrupted the intimate moment. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding a small package wrapped in antique paper. "Sorry to interrupt," she smiled knowingly, "but there's something I wanted to show you before I leave." The package contained a tiny book of American poetry, worn by time and frequent use. "It was your father's," explained Sarah, addressing Emily. "The first gift William gave me when we began seeing each other. I've kept it all these years as a reminder that even interrupted stories have value." Emily caressed the worn cover, feeling the connection with a past that no longer hurt so much, that formed part of a broader and more complex narrative, but fundamentally beautiful. "I thought it could be the first private donation for your special collection of first editions," added Sarah. Emily exchanged a look with James, who nodded with silent understanding. "I think there's a perfect place for it," replied Emily, heading toward the central showcase where the most precious literary treasures of the collection were exhibited. As she carefully placed the small volume alongside works by Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and other giants of American literature, Emily reflected on the unexpected paths she had traveled since that afternoon when she literally stumbled upon James in the library. The circle seemed to close perfectly. The books that had always been her refuge now became the bridge uniting past and future, healing old wounds and creating spaces for new stories. The scent of magnolias still perfumed the air when James whispered again, "May I continue?" But this time he wasn't referring to the pages of a book, but to the love story that Emily and he were just beginning to write together, a story where the Sullivan name no longer represented an intimidating legacy, but a reconciled inheritance, and where books would continue to be silent witnesses that, sometimes, the most beautiful chapters begin precisely with an unexpected stumble. Books, like hearts, keep secrets that only reveal themselves to those who have the courage to turn their pages with patience and love, discovering that the most powerful stories are those that continue to be written even after the last page.